When I was a kid, I had very strong vibrational stages. And then sometime as I left my body, I would hear radio stations, disembodied voices, music sometimes. They were whispering about me. And whenever your parents whisper about you, it's never a good thing. I heard them saying maybe we should take him to a doctor because I'd been telling them about my experience.
You're going out of body and you're finding past figures like maybe Jesus or Genghis Khan, and you're somehow connecting with them, and then you're conducting an interview in the non-physical, coming back, jotting it all down, and then putting this into a video series or a vlog, right? Putting it up on your YouTube channel.
My goal is to give them the benefit of my years of experience, because everything for me was trial and error. Astral projection, first of all, it helps you to get over one of the worst fears of mankind, death. You realize that death is just an illusion.
Welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds.
Hi guys, welcome to the channel. This is the Endless Possibilities podcast. My name is Gareth and I'm your host today for another mind-blowing episode. Today on the show I have Rick Pyle. Rick is the man behind the Astral Club on YouTube. He has an incredible YouTube channel. He is an out-of-body explorer, exploring the out-of-body state since he's been a child, and he has compiled over 400 interviews. Rick has this system that he's come up with where he goes out of body and he seeks out figures that have passed on, and he interviews people like Jesus and different famous people, and he then puts it up on his YouTube channel and you can listen to the interviews. So he's a fascinating character. So let's get into the interview now. Rick, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Gareth. I appreciate your invitation.
Yeah, you've got a really fascinating YouTube channel, lots of great videos. And I mean, your background is out-of-body experiences, and it's been something that I fell in love with maybe 14, 15 years ago. I must have listened to Bob Monroe's audiobooks 100 times over and over. I just love all this stuff. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and we'll just jump in for those who don't know you or don't know your background. What got you interested in out-of-body experiences, Rick?
Well, it kind of goes back to right before this lifetime, I believe. My first astral projection I was about 3 or 4 months old, and I was lying in my bassinet. It was a beautiful day. I was just staring up at the blue sky, not thinking really about much of anything. And I could sense my mother was very nearby. And I saw this spider come down on this little string here. And I'm not from Australia, so we don't have monsters like that. But it frightened me, and I couldn't cry and I couldn't move because the body was still very much undeveloped. So I did what came natural to me. I just jumped out of my body, went up about 50 feet or about 15 meters in Celsius, or Celsius centigrade. No, Celsius. No, metric. Sorry. 15 meters metric. Yeah, we're on the old system here. I got to convert things in my head. So anyway, I was up about 50 feet up in the air, 15 meters, and I was just kind of looking around. I saw my mother next to my bassinet with her bikini on, doing sunbathing. Well, I didn't really feel or think about much of anything, as I recall. I had some curiosity, so I went to our little apartment and just looked around because, when you're a baby, you don't really have much of a viewpoint. Years later, I was able to describe to my parents what our apartment looked like, even though we moved when I was 11 months old. So I really shouldn't have any kind of a clear memory, but something about the astral projection that has allowed me to keep those type of memories in my conscious mind. That's how it all began, quite frankly. Before this lifetime, this is a bit of an expanded answer for you. I volunteered to come back to this, to Earth. I didn't have to. I could have done other things, but I wanted to spread I wanted to take care of my family, but I also wanted to spread spiritual knowledge, like astral projection, for instance. So I was granted the ability to pick my siblings and to pick my parents. And I have 4 pre-life memories. That's before this lifetime. The first was I was hovering outside of all places, a German beer garden. And my father, who was in the military, the American military, was sitting at a table outside with 3 other of his soldier companions. And I just liked the feel of him. I liked his intelligence, his sense of humor, the way he laughed. And I'd known him before, too. I knew that right off the bat. So I decided he was going to be my father. The next memory I have before this lifetime, my parents are still alive. They're lovely and they're not alcoholics, but this is how the story goes. The next memory I have, I was in a bar and my father was there. And you might see I whispered in his ear, "Look over to your right." He did, locked eyes with a woman who wanted to be my mother. The rest is history. The third memory, my mother was pregnant, and I wasn't inside the fetus all the time. I just kind of touched base, like we say in baseball here in America. I just wanted to feel what was going on, make sure everything was okay. And I was able to see her office and where she sat. And years later, I was able to tell her that. And she quit before I was born. I mean, those days, women quite often quit their jobs to raise children. The fourth time, I was rushing to the hospital. I remember this so clearly, just flying to the hospital because I knew I was being born, and I had to connect once and for all if I was going to have that lifetime. And at first, I undershot the hospital, the floor that I was on, and I was in the basement, and there was this old man who was obviously sad, standing over this covered stretcher, which I assumed was his body. I wanted to help him, but I didn't have time because I was being pulled up through the floors, and I still remember the glimpses as I was going up. Next thing I knew, I was inside the infant. It was bright lights, it was cold, and I got a whack on the butt to get the old lungs going. Now I hear they massage the butt to get the lungs going, but back then they gave you a smack. And if you think about life here on Earth, you get more smacks than you get massages.
I definitely got more smacks than I got massages, Rick.
So that's a little bit about the beginning of everything.
So you were just hanging around as a disembodied awareness or consciousness, kind of observing the life that you were about to come into.
Yes. I didn't actually bond until that moment of birth.
Okay. And fast forward. A common thing that I noticed, right, myself included, I had some very young experiences, maybe 3 or 4 years of age, floating out of the body, floating around the house, my grandmother's house.
Oh, great.
And then a closing down, and just been a regular teenager, going through my 20s, finding a job, and then the pull for exploration came back then, kind of in my mid-20s. Was that similar for you, or did you keep a lot of that sort of them spiritual gifts?
Well, I don't have memories left before age 4 or so. I had been doing projections. I have that feeling that I was, but it wasn't until I was around 4 that I have actual real good memories right now of my parents putting me to bed. And then I'd wait a little bit and I'd roll out of my body onto the floor, pick myself up. I could see through my hands. So yeah, I'm out. And then I would just either go downstairs and see what they were up to, or I'd fly through our picture window and then fly around our forest or fly around down by the local elementary school and go inside and run around, which was infinitely interesting to me back in those days, just running around that dark school. Those were some of my beginning memories. And it was just for me flying around. I didn't really have any knowledge about what it was or what I was doing. I assumed everybody was doing it. When they talked about dreams, I kind of thought that's what they were talking about too. It wasn't until I went to kindergarten when I was talking to the kids, and they looked at me strange and called me weird and I was a liar. So I stopped talking to them. But I never stopped projecting because it was so much fun at that age that there's no way I was going to give that up. And it does kind of separate you, though, from your peers. You've got this secret that's a big part of you that you can't share with other people. And certainly that, that does cause a little bit of concern. My parents, I overheard them once when I was a few years older, and they were whispering about me. And whenever your parents whisper about you, it's never a good thing. And I heard them saying maybe we should take him to a doctor, because I'd been telling them about my experiences. I don't hold it against them. It was the 60s in a small town. Nobody had any idea about astral projection or out of the body experiences. But luckily they didn't. So I didn't go on some medication that would have zoned me out. But I started keeping a complete secret from everybody. I started keeping journals, though, when I learned how to write. And I still have them to this day. I have boxes and boxes of these yellow and white tablets with all these journal entries. And most of it I can't really use for an episode because it's kids stuff, something that kids find interesting. But nobody wants a whole 20-minute episode of me running around my elementary school or even flying over our woods. But those are really my earlier type experiences. And I continued to project, and I never really stopped. I mean, there were periods of time when not much was going on. And then there were other periods of time when a lot of projections were going on. I've noticed over the years that the phase of the moon has something to do with it. I've noticed that as the moon becomes full, it's just so easy for me because I feel like I'm being pulled out. The air time with the new moon, much less so. But that's how it was for me as a kid.
And Rick, what about the teenage years? Did it quiet down?
No, actually, it kind of sped up, really. And my telepathic and other skills started kicking in too, because I started communicating with entities on the astral, and you use telepathy, of course. So it started to stick, and I started to sense people's thoughts. My family was the clearest, but I'd sense thoughts from the teacher, from other students. It was quite eerie after a while.
It's funny, Rick, because I immediately had the thought to ask you about your parents, and you just immediately answered me.
It happens. It happens.
So that's fascinating. Okay, so for you, there was no real I want to have an out of body experience, right? Because for me, there was. I had a fear of dying. Uh, any of my early memories or the early abilities that I had of having out of body experience and mystical experience, they disappeared for me, and I had a very normal kind of childhood, teenage years. Oh well, typical, right? No, I won't say normal. And then later on, I just kind of had this feeling of dejection. Life had no meaning to me. I wanted to find answers, so I started researching. And then I came across Bob Monroe, right? He seems to be the one for a lot of people. So for me, I wanted to get out of body, but you were always having out of body experiences.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. It was something that happened really. It started out naturally as a baby, and it just continued. Sure, every now and again, if I had a bit of a time without projections, I put more energy into doing it. But for the most part, it would kick in by itself. And I also woke up too to Robert Monroe. I didn't know what to call what I was doing. I knew I had to keep it secret. But in 1972, I ran across Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body. I bought that book, took it home. I read it with a flashlight all night long. And I had school in the morning, but I didn't care, because here was this gentleman. He wasn't some kook or a hippie. He was a businessman, an entrepreneur, a pilot, and he talked about experiences that were just like mine.
Hi guys, I hope you are enjoying the interview with Rick. This is just a quick request for those who aren't already subscribed. If you would like to help this channel out, and you would like to help promote our content out to new audiences, hit subscribe. Subscribing to our channel lets YouTube know that we are a worthwhile podcast and channel on their platform, and they start to push us out to new audiences. The bigger the audience, the bigger the guests. When we reach out, they're more inclined to want to be interviewed by myself, and it just goes for Yeah, helping to grow and having more great guests for you guys to watch. And also you get a notification every time we release a new video. So thank you for your support. Now back to the show with Rick.
Is that were just like mine. And that made me say, well, first of all, this is great, but also I'm not alone. I'm not mentally ill, because here's this gentleman. He's doing the same thing, and he's a very respected member of the community.
But Rick, he really struggled with that. You know, was he actually having a brain tumor, right? Was something
Mhm.
affecting his health? Was he dying? So there was a lot of fear for Bob. You not so much because it was so natural.
Yeah, I've been doing it ever since I could remember. For me, it was as natural as dreaming. So, I mean, sure, there were things occasionally that would pop up, especially in the lower astral, that could be a bit frightening to people who don't really know what's going on. And as a kid, I would get frightened sometimes, but it didn't stop me, because I found so much joy in it. Just flying through the night sky was great for me back in those days. And today, I still love doing it. I don't talk about it in episodes because it doesn't make for an interesting episode, but I still do that. Flying to the night sky is one of the most thrilling things that I've ever done. So there's no way I'm going to stop in that from astral projecting. It's too great, too entertaining, too amazing just to try to stop it. Luckily, since I've been doing it forever, this paralyzing fear never really got a grip on me. And after a while, seeing a spirit wandering around was just another day for me. So, I had some odd experiences, but for me, it was just a greater part of reality. Life can be scary, but you can't just stop. So I think it's done a lot for me. It's made me who I am today, for whether that's good or bad. It's helped me to deal with fear of other things, to realize that if I can do astral projection and see all these odd things, then I can handle whatever they've got here on the physical plane. That's nothing compared to some of the challenges on the astral.
Well, so one thing I noticed is that you're really trying to help a lot of people, right? I've been looking at all the amazing content you've compiled and put up on your YouTube channel, hours and hours and hours of interviews with disembodied souls, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But just to come back briefly, the vibrational state, was that
Mhm.
something you were experiencing when you were having these separations, or did that for one of the things that I notice when I talk to experienced OBE people is that the vibrational state gets less and less the more experiences they have going out. Was that something that was happening for you? Did you notice that?
When I was a kid, I had very strong vibrational stages. And then sometimes, and as I left my body, I would hear radio stations or voices, disembodied voices, music sometimes. And then there'd be a moment of blackness and I'd be out of my body. Today, all of that is kind of shortcut. I feel myself leaving my body. There's a moment of blackness, and then I'm out wherever I want to be. And I just take it from there. So I think, yeah, I agree that it has become essentially a very streamlined process now. But I notice newer people have a lot of these experiences, and that's why I talk about them. So my goal is to give them the benefit of my years of experience, because everything for me was trial and error until I was 12 or 13 years old, read Bob Monroe's book. So I want to make sure they understand that once they leave their body, for instance, they might see a shadow figure in the corner. Don't feed it with fear. Just ignore it. It'll go away. It's nothing more than an astral parasite, like an annoying mosquito. It doesn't have intelligence. It just feeds on fear and those types of negative emotions. So, that's how it's been.
Okay, we'll get into that. And I just want to come back. Just you, there was no YouTube when you were doing this, right? There was no internet, so you were trying to figure all of this out as a kid. you know, getting out of body, maybe meeting these beings, kind of like Bob Monroe's first book, right? He hadn't a clue what was going on. It took him maybe, you know, 100 times of just getting out and moving around his house before he could go further.
Hmm.
Did you have fear? Fear of any of these beings early on? Or how did they start to turn up, right? Because when you were a kid, you were flying around. When did you start to notice that there was other intelligences when you got into this out-of-body state?
Well, from time to time, I encountered different types of being. I remember there was one being that came to me when I was on the school playground in my astral body. And I was in the lower levels. As a kid, I was mostly in the lower levels because I didn't know how to go up. For me, flying was about as high as I could go. Anyway, he showed up. He looked pretty gruesome. He'd been in some sort of an accident, and he was a special person, and he just was kind of attracted to me. And once I got over how he looked, I just started talking to him like a mother might talk to a child. And eventually I got the idea to let him know that he's passed on, and that, yeah, we could play here a little bit, but it's time for him to move on. And I started comforting him, quieting down his fears. And then eventually he just disappeared and I never saw him again. I think my ignorance was a benefit at that point. I was too dumb to know to be afraid. So I took these things like many kids do at face value. I just figured, oh, well, that's the way it is. Sometimes in physical life, you see weird people, you just deal with it, you just get used to it. And as I said before, because it was such an amazing experience for me, that there was no way I was going to stop. At worst, yeah, I might get frightened and I'll be pulled back to my body immediately. But I knew also that there was always that safety. I always had that astral cord connecting me to my physical body. And then if I was afraid or any type of feeling like that, it goes along my astral cord just like a telephone line. And then I just get pulled back again. That's the worst that can happen. So with that kind of knowledge, I guess I just dealt with that fear in a way that I didn't allow it to conquer me or to prevent me from doing what I felt I needed to do.
Okay. And what about higher intelligences like guides and stuff like that? Like when did they start turning up for you?
Well, not until much later in life, when I was, I think really college is the first time I asked for and met my guide. It never, people ask me today, oh, did you have a guide with you when you were a kid? I said it never occurred to me that you could have such a thing. So I never asked for it or sought it out. And to this day, I'm very much of an individualist. I like going my own way. I like going where I want to go and doing whatever I wish to do. I don't need someone holding my hand. And
Mhm.
I certainly didn't by the time I was going to college, because by then I'd had, I don't know, thousands of experiences. So I just never felt the need. I ended up reading a book that said, oh, you can summon your guide. And so I said, okay, I'll try that. And that's when he showed up, and I met him, and he was very straight laced, wearing a business suit. And since then, I've loosened him up quite a bit. He actually understands humor at this point. But that's how I just never knew that I should be really paralyzed and afraid. I just assumed it was just another thing I had to deal with. And I had that safety, always going back to my body. Worst case scenario, I'll just go back.
Lucid dreams. Did you start having lucid dreams as well? Was that something that started happening?
Yes, yes. I think lucid dreams and astral projection are cousins.
Yeah.
When you start having that type of awareness, it can feed into lucid dreams. And in fact, you can go from a lucid dream to an astral projection, or an astral projection into a
Yeah.
lucid dream. So yes, I started having them and had a lot of fun with them long before I discovered how to astral project from them. And I remember there was one particular lucid dream I had. I was standing in the back of my parents' yard, and I had just watched Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments. That's where he was Moses and with his staff parting the waters, all of that. And there were people standing next to me, some neighbors. And I said, I'm going to throw down these woods and bring in a boiling sea. And of course, they laughed at me. So until I went like this and the woods fell down, and then this huge tsunami of boiling water started coming in from the horizon. And they started freaking out. So I said, fear not, for I shall stop this wave. And then it put up my hand out and it froze solid. So lucid dreams were a lot of fun because in a lucid dream, of course, you're the producer, you're the director, you're the executive producer, you're the actor, you're everything. So you can control the environment. So it's a lot of fun. When you project in the astral, you learn pretty quickly that, like the physical, it's a plane that exists outside of you.
You don't have as much
And
control.
really manipulate it with a thought. So lucid dreams are a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've had the lucid dreams as well, where I'll become aware in the dream, and then all of a sudden, boom, the body starts vibrating, and then I can project in an out of body experiences. So for me, they were always a prelude to an out of body experience, and I've also had the same ones where I've been out of body and then come back and then gone into a lucid dream.
Yeah, that's quite, that happens often.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Bob Monroe calls it locale 2, right? We project out of our physical form. We're in a sort of a copy of our physical body, which is like an astral body, and we can move around either by flying or using our mind to project where we want to go, right? So when did you discover that there were other worlds, like astral realms that you could get into? For me, early on, the best I could think of was to go to, take me to the car park, or go here, or go, I couldn't think quick enough to get into these astral realms. So when did you start getting into them, and what sort of experiences did you have there?
Well, for me, the most interesting things that happened at that age were space travel and time travel. Space travel started where most space travels start, going to the moon. Neil Armstrong had just landed on the moon in 1969. We saw the fuzzy camera footage of him hopping around on the moon. I thought that was neat. So that was really the first off-Earth place that I went. And the first time I went to the moon, I took off like a rocket. I'd never moved that fast before. Of course, we know that if you want to get to the moon, you have to fly pretty darn fast. Especially if you want to do it within the time of an astral projection, which never lasts more than 15 or 20 minutes tops. And so I enjoyed that. I was bouncing around the moon because that's what I saw the astronauts do. And I was looking back, and I wrote down in my journal, it's a half Earth tonight. it was an amazing experience. And from there, I went on to other planets and eventually stars. Time travel was interesting to me, though, too, because I love history. And back then, I loved dinosaurs as a kid. So my first time travel, I went back to about 75 million years ago. And I was in this jungle, and this creature came out. It looked like kind of an ostrich. And it had feathers. So when I got back to my body, I wrote down that I must have failed to get there because dinosaurs don't have feathers, which of course was what we believed back then. And then, another time I traveled back, and I was hovering over this beautiful delta as the sun was beginning to rise. And I saw these, what I thought were logs lying on the beach, until I got closer and I saw that they were huge crocodilians. Their head was as big as my body. And I thought for a second, which was my first animal trip too, I wonder what that one's thinking as it was warming up. And bam, I was inside its body, and I was hearing what it was thinking. Very primitive thoughts, very fuzzy, because it was kind of just waking up. And just for fun, I used its leg, paw, I don't know what you call them. Anyway, I wrote 2 + 2 = 4 in the sand. My 4 was misshapen. It's hard to make a 4 with that limb. And I thought, how funny would it be if some poor archaeologist dug that up in the future and totally was going to ruin his career for saying the dinosaurs had mathematics in Arab letters and numerals. Anyway, those were some of my some of the trips that I enjoyed. What I found later on was that you could travel into what we call the future. Of course, there is no future. There is no past, present, or future. That's the time-space illusion. There's only an eternal now. And you can see that very realistically as you project in the astral. And I eventually figured out that if I flew far enough through will, and whenever I write will, I write it all in caps. Whenever I was able to will myself into the future, if I went up far enough, I could stay there much longer, and I could even interact with physical people because I had a body that was visible at that point in time. So there was that was quite interesting to me. And eventually I'd meet my tribe in the year 15,000 AD in what is today Indiana. And I spent 4 winters there before I was pulled back when I was unaware. And only about 15 or 20 minutes had passed during that whole 4 years. It was funny. I sat in my car for about 20 minutes. My wife came out to the garage and said, "Are you okay?" Because I was reviewing all the controls because I hadn't driven for so long, at least to me. And I was really missing my wife and daughter. And so I was extra happy to see them when they were like, "What's going on? We just went to sleep last night." It's not like you haven't seen us, but so there's like that second life you can live and interact with future people. Those were the planes that I would project to at that stage of the game. I didn't really go into the higher levels of the astral until I went into college.
Okay. So a lot of the out-of-body explorers, Bob Monroe, Bruce Moen was another guy, the Monroe Institute, they have all of these different CD collections where they teach you how to do soul retrievals, and it's like you're being put to work. Did you sort of get that calling that they wanted you to do work, they wanted you to go, and a big part of Bob Monroe was he would get this beacon calling him, and he would be pulled out to these places where somebody had died and they were trapped, and he would help to bring them back to where they were supposed to go. Did that happen for you, Rick?
It happened more or less kind of like that, but also I would just be, flying around different places, and I would encounter these spirits who were in the lower astral and were confused and angry and didn't know where to go. I just went to them because they needed help. Now, most of them would ignore me because they were in their own little private world, their own little private hell, and I couldn't help them. But the ones that I could help, I just helped because it was the right thing to do. I didn't think anything special of it. It's just like if you're walking down the street today and there's somebody who obviously needs help, you're going to stop and help them. That's all it was. I didn't think of it as any great calling or anything. It was just something you're supposed to do as a human to your fellow humans. And the first one I ever helped was a neighbor who lived right across from us. And she wasn't very good with the kids. If our ball went on her lawn, she would yell at us. And so we kind of stayed away from her. But I saw her outside her home after she'd passed. And she was obviously upset and didn't know what was going on. So I went to her and just talked with her, asked her what was going on. And she told me. And eventually I told her, I said, you've passed on and it's okay. It's fine. You just need to get calm and to ask for help and send that out into space. And then you'll get the help that you need to move on from here. And I just remember the look of peace on her face when she finally did that and then disappeared. That was so amazing to me that I could help in that process, because I've never seen that look of peace in this lifetime here on Earth, but I've seen it now a number of times on the faces of people who had just been frightened, terrified, or wrapped up in their physical lives and traumas and regrets. And you see that all smooth away. All those wrinkles go away, and then they just take this beautiful, unearthly light around them and that calm, serene face, and then they move on. And that, to me, is just such a wonderful experience that, I wanted to share it with anyone who I would come across. and eventually my guide, when I met him, would take me on different types of missions or send me places. But back then, it was just something I did just because I could. Uh, I didn't, I didn't think anything much about it other than just helping somebody.
And would you go with them and would you get to witness what was happening? I think they called it like the park, right? This sort of intermediate place where souls would go and they would rest in between lives. Did you get to witness any of them places?
No, I didn't follow them. I felt that where they were going was where they needed to go right now. My job was to help them make that step,
Okay.
not to follow them. If they were making that step, they were going to have help, much more qualified than I am. So no, I didn't. I didn't see that as my job really, or as my place.
Okay. And fear tests, so just I'm just using myself. I'm using as an example how my OBEs changed. So they went from me having the experiences, flying around here, flying around there, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, let's now put you into classrooms and we'll make these simulations where you have to make decisions. And I know I read these about these in Bob Monroe's books where he would have to do something and he would fail and then it would happen again and he would do it a different way and so on and so on. Did that happen to you as well, Rick?
Well, I attended an astral guide school for a period of time, and it's one of my playlists, along with Space and Aliens, Q&A, interviews with entities, and there's over 400 episodes now. For me, it was, I don't know, it wasn't quite like that, but it was just something that I just instinctively went along with. I didn't have some of that, some of those things that Bob experienced, but and it may be because he started later in life and I started earlier. Perhaps it was that. I mean, the astral is what you make of it, and if you go in with certain preconceptions, it'll present itself differently than if you don't. So, I had similar experiences, but not exactly like that.
So I know you got to meet Bob, right?
Yes, I did. That was the highlight of my life, quite frankly. It was, I mean, he was my hero. Kids my
Me
age,
too, me too.
kids my age, they liked heroes, football heroes, basketball heroes, baseball heroes. But for me, my hero was Bob Monroe. And after I was out of the Air Force, I went to the Monroe Institute, beautiful place in the hills of Virginia. You have to stay there because there's literally nothing else around. Like hiking trails, it's just a lovely place. And I took some courses there. And that's when I got a chance to meet Bob. We talked for about an hour and a half after a class. It was thrilling to me. He told me about his experiences. I told him about my time travels and my space travels, which really fascinated him. He called me the time traveler. It was amazing to have a chance to meet him. He invited me to be part of his Explorer program that he was doing. Unfortunately, I just accepted a job 800 miles away, and I just couldn't do that. But it was one of the most significant experiences in my life, talking to what I consider the modern father of astral projection or out of the body experiences. I prefer the word astral projection because it has a little bit of magic about it. OBE sounds very clinical, and I like the magic of astral projection, so that's why I use that term rather than the more clinical out of the body experiences. But it's
And
the
that
same
was
thing.
was that in the early 90s?
No, it was right out of when I got out of the Air Force. It was about 1986.
Okay, okay, 86. Yeah, because I think Bob passed away around 93, 94, right?
Yeah.
So did you connect with Bob in after he left his body?
No, no, and I never thought to even do that, quite frankly. I mean, if anything, I would have thought it was presumptuous. Because keep in mind, this was my hero. The fact that I got a chance to talk to him for an hour and a half to me was a huge honor. The idea at that point in time of connecting with him would be like, kind of inviting God out for a golf outing. It just wasn't in my lexicon. Never occurred to me.
Okay. Okay. So you said you took some of the programs there. How And for anyone who doesn't know, the Monroe Institute, they have a whole series of programs, the Gateway Experience, some of the other ones, I think Life After Life, and so on. And they use these different levels, like Focus 10, Focus 12, Focus 15, 21, and so on. And it's a way of projecting your consciousness into different states of awareness, right? So you having so much experience in the outer body, how did you fare with these tapes and binaural beats that they used?
Well, I mean, I listened to the tapes many years ago, and they certainly were interesting, and they helped me sharpen some things. And Hemi-Sync, nothing against Bob. I know it helps people, but it just gave me a headache. So it didn't work for me, but that's the way astral projection is.
I never had an out of body experience with the Hemi-Sync ever. Never, ever, ever. They always just happened at night time when I was sleeping or I would wake
Yes,
up. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So that's the courses with him, and of course the book and all of that is what really helped me to get more experiences out of astral projection. And then when he came out with his other books, it was like The Ultimate Machine and then Far Journeys. Those were very advanced. I mean, you could tell he was really getting his stride there. I don't use the locale things. I don't really connect with that. But I do use some of his words like ident. And ident is how I go places once I've been there, at least. And, an ident is more than just an address and a time, it's also an energy level. You have to feel what it is to be there. Once you've got that ident, you have that feel for what it is to exist in that time and place, then you can go there again. And so that's how I've done that. Other than that, I just use my will to go to a particular level or place, and then I just find myself there after a moment of blackness. It's the same thing now. I look up in the sky, and I still love space traveling. I'll find a star at random and say, I want to go to that star. And there's a sensation of movement, a moment of blackness, and then I'm there checking out the solar system, if they have any planets and if there's any life on them. So maybe I'm just kind of streamlining things a little bit once again. I think those locales, that kind of stuff would be very helpful to newer people. But I guess I was so set in my ways already by the time that stuff came out that I listened to it. I was very appreciative of it, and I think it could help people. But it
Yeah.
wasn't something that I connected with.
Yeah, so Bob was big into acronyms, right? And he would have all of these little kind of shortened abbreviations
Inspect,
of words. Yeah,
yeah.
inspec,
I
I
wonder if he was in the
dare.
military because we had all that stuff in the military too. I don't know.
Very much so. That's what it seemed like. It was very much like, yeah, Roger, this. Yeah, so and I mean, I remember reading the last book and having to always go back and look up the meaning of what it was, what did this little word mean? And if you didn't, you would really struggle to understand what they were talking about.
Oh yeah, yeah. He had a whole dictionary in the back of those books so that you could understand what he was talking about. I haven't adopted all the terms, but I liked ident because I didn't have a better word for it, and it seemed to capture in a quick and easy word a concept that can be a little nebulous. So I adopted that. It's certainly been helpful.
So, Rick, in terms of like you, right, and the quality of your consciousness, did you notice that you were changing as a being with all of these experiences? Was your capacity to love increasing, your own self-awareness, your ego getting less and less?
Well, my wife would tell you that my ego is still a little out of control. But I like to think that I have definitely evolved a bit over the years. Astral projection, first of all, it helps you to get over one of the worst fears of mankind,
Yeah.
death. You realize that death is just an illusion. It's merely a door that everybody has to walk through at some point, and you don't dissolve, you don't disappear, you don't go into nothingness. You just become another type of energy. and then you go on and learn from that. It's merely a doorway. It is not an end. That is the number one thing I think most people, and certainly myself, can appreciate, because the ego always struggles with that. It can't conceive of being blacked out. If you even conceive of that, fear comes up. But certainly astral projection puts a quash to that pretty quickly when you realize that you have a consciousness outside of that physical shell. It's no more you than a car is you. That car is merely a vehicle. It takes you from place to place here on the physical plane. And that's what your body is. It merely takes you from place to place on the physical plane, allows you to interact and to experience things through your senses. I know I also changed with, as I mentioned earlier, with my telepathic ability. It became stronger and stronger. I remember I would do ESP experiments when I was about 12. My sister was about 11. And one time I sent her upstairs with a tablet and a pen. And I told her, I gave her no instruction other than draw the first thing that comes into your mind. And so I sent to her an image, a typical stick figure with a round head and then like a cross for a very simple stick figure. She came downstairs with the exact same thing, only upside down. That to me really confirmed what I'd suspected about my ability to project thoughts and then to receive them as well. My brother, whenever I wanted to see him or my mother needed him and he was off somewhere playing, back in those days, you didn't always know where your kid was.
Yeah.
You ask a mother, where's your kid? Outside playing. That's the way it was. But I would call him telepathically, and I'd be at the kitchen window calling him telepathically. And always eventually he'd end up running up and he'd look up at me, what do you want? And I tell him what was going on. So those types of things just became commonplace for me. I didn't think of anything much about it other than, oh, well, I guess that ability lies in all of us. All I'm doing is just farming it a bit, and just growing it a bit faster than other people. So, it gave me a certain confidence, although I still had that whole hidden part of me about astral projection. And it wasn't until I went to college where I saw a poster in the Union and it said, you can leave your body, which obviously attracted me. And I went there and there was a group that I considered a bit culty, but I met my girlfriend there. And she was also an advanced astral projector, and she had my last name too. And she came from the same area my family came from. So I have this little theory that people of Celtic origin are a little bit better at astral projection than other people. And if you think about it, think about some of the authors like Monroe, Muldoon, Bruce, Frost. These are all Celtic type names. I think it's a lot like the Kenyan runners in the Olympics. Yes, we can all run unless we have some sort of physical problem, but we can't be like these Kenyan runners because they got these big lungs and these long legs. And so they're just a step above everyone else. And so that's just a little pet theory. I don't have any proof for it.
Do you know where your origins came from, Rick?
Yeah, I'm from, the British Isles and a little bit in France and a little bit in Germany.
Okay.
So,
okay, fascinating. And what you're referring to is called remote viewing, right?
Well, remote viewing is another cousin of astral projection. I've read McMonagall, and matter of fact, it's right here on my desk, The Ultimate Time Machine. There's a difference. When you're lucid dreaming or you're astral projecting, your body appears to be asleep. And if someone tries to talk to you, they'll just wake you up. In remote viewing, you are conscious, just in a deeper state, deeper meditative state. And I think it's essentially you're sending a stalk of consciousness, like 10%, let's say, out to a coordinate somewhere. And indeed, someone can sit next to you and say, okay, I want you to go to these coordinates. And they'll give him the coordinates, and then he'll go there with that stalk of consciousness, see what's going on, And then it comes back, and then you can tell them, this is what I saw. But you're not really like, I mean, in astral projection, as you know, you are there.
Yeah.
There is no part of you that's elsewhere. You have a sense there's a physical body back there, but you don't want to think about that, because if you do, you'll get pulled back. So I believe astral projection is the pinnacle of this type of consciousness. And lucid dreaming, remote viewing, they're cousins, but they don't have the spiritual level.
They're not as fun either, right? There's nothing more fun than feeling that vibrational pull and yeah, you're out and you're flying about. The remote viewing though, I've had a few little experiences where somebody will put an object in a box. And I did this one. I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Campbell. He was one of the
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course.
Okay. So Tom Campbell, I followed Tom for years, and one of his videos, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago, he put an item in a box and he put the box on the video and he said, now, tell me what's in the box, right? First thing that comes to your head. And I had my pen and I said, okay, I'm seeing an apple, right? And then I'm like, okay, now I see a star, wrote a star, and now I'm seeing and he was like, it doesn't matter how silly it sounds, just write it down. And the last one was a car. And I was like, how can a car be in that little box? And how can there be three things? He said there was an item in there, and I'm after seeing three things. So at the end of the video, he opens up the box and he takes out an apple corer, right? For, you push down on the top of an apple.
Oh,
And
yeah.
what I was after seeing was the apple, the star, which is, if you look at an apple corer, it's got a circle in the middle and it's got lines going out like this. And then corer, I got car. So it's like I was getting the information, but I just wasn't seeing it the way, you would see an actual object. So I think we get an awful lot of information, but a lot of the times our own mind, we discredit what we get, right?
Yeah. Let me tell you a little story that reminds me of that. My brother, until he began to astral project, was my greatest doubter. So one time he asked me, would you do a test? I said, yeah, sure, I guess. I'm going to put something on my table downstairs in my basement. So you astral project and then tell me what you see. So I did that. And I came back and I said, oh, you've got a Russian samovar on your table, which of course is before the revolution, what richer people would keep tea in. And then they would just pour it and they have tea all day long. He goes, I don't even know what that is. No, I just have a book there. So a couple of years went by and I went to visit him. We went down to the cellar because he said, let me show you this thing I got from this old man who's moving down to Miami because his wife died. So we go downstairs and there is that Russian samovar that I saw 2 years before. That's the thing about the astral, when you astral project, I think especially when you go into time a lot, it's easy to slip. And so I projected a couple years into the future, and that's what I saw on the table. So it's kind of a cousin of what you were talking about, but it also gets into some of the problems that you can encounter when you're astral projecting, because in the physical, we've got this very grounded idea of reality. And once you go into the astral quite a bit, it starts to shake loose. And so a number of things can occur. And like in your visions, you saw that star in that apple. So it was kind of, you were seeing a certain reality of that particular device, which is not uncharacteristic of astral projection. I think that's why the military intelligence agencies use remote viewing and not astral projection. Remote viewing gives you a pretty good look at what's going on in this current present reality, the physical reality. But astral projection, it's really easy to wander into other things. And, when you're in military intelligence, you don't want to know what's going to be there 2 years from now. You want to know what's going to be there right now. And you need grounded reality.
And they probably have somebody beside them that's going to stay in that critical mind space, right? And ask them particular questions, and then they give them the information and they write it down. Exactly. Whereas when you're going out yourself, that part can sometimes get a little bit cloudy, right? And another thing I noticed was, like, sometimes the room, stuff might seem like it's on the opposite side of the room, or items that you weren't actually in your sitting room all of a sudden are there. So it does kind of get a little bit cloudy sometimes.
Yeah, when you astral project, usually you're in the lowest level of the astral, just a phase above the physical at that point.
Yeah.
And your room or other physical reality will look maybe a lot like your physical room, but not exact. And there could be furniture that's not there right now, or a painting that was there 10 years in the past. So a lot of that you have to kind of take, just go with it, because it's going to happen, because the physical reality is very much going unstuck, even in the lower astral. So that's something that you really have to adjust to. It's just what happens when you start to astral project. I remember there was this soldier who wrote a journal in about his time as a Revolutionary War soldier when we were fighting you guys back in the War of the Revolution. And he had an astral projection. He didn't know what it was, but he described one to a T. And he saw this tree on the hill. And when he got back to his body, he woke up, there was no tree there. So he doubted the experience because there was no tree there. But of course, it could have been there in the past or could be there in the future. So, it's very deceiving to people who aren't used to the malleability of the astral. It doesn't necessarily hold to our concrete physical environment. If somebody thought, oh, I'd like to add a chair there and I could see in my mind what that chair is going to look like, you might leave your body and see the chair there because somebody put in enough energy to put it there. But it doesn't mean you didn't project. It just means you saw a reality that was a little bit different or maybe ahead.
Okay. I have an interesting question. Did you ever get any places where you weren't able to project? So I've had a couple of experiences where I would try and go to a certain location and I would get this really kind of a dull, like, no, you cannot go there. Has that happened to you?
Yes, it has. There are certain time jumps, for instance, that are blocked. In other words, like Alice in Wonderland, you can't get there from here. And so that's one of the things that I've experienced. I remember one time I was going to this military base and it was known for hiding UFO kind of stuff. Eventually I got in, but the first time I went there, I got caught in this electromagnetic strong EM field and it held me there. I couldn't get out until I was finally pulled back to my body eventually. And it was like ants crawling all over my astral body. And I'm not used to feeling any kind of discomfort or pain, but it was distinctively unpleasant. And my theory is that the people up top know about astral projection, know about spies. I didn't have any evil intentions, but they didn't know that.
Yeah.
So they had it protected by that strong EM field, because I find the astral body, especially in the lower levels, reacts to very strong EM fields. One time as a kid, there was one of these substations that had, fences around it with warning high voltage. I got too close and I was pulled in and I was stuck to it. I couldn't get loose. Now today I would just travel into the future or the past where it wasn't there. But back then I didn't know how to do that. And so I just felt ridiculous. So I was like, oh, this is great. This is a wasted experience now. I didn't get frightened because once again, I knew I was going to be pulled back. But that's one of the places that is unpleasant to go to, like I said, in that military base too, where there's very sensitive information. Let me tell you another place I couldn't go to. When George Bush, the younger, became president, his first day in the Oval Office, I wanted to project just to see what was going on. Once again, I'm not a spy. I'm a loyal American. I was in the military as an officer, but I just, I wanted to be nosy. It was just me. So I went there and I was stopped at the door by these two, what I called Astral Secret Service agents. And I scanned them real briefly. And I I saw that their bodies were beneath the White House into some sort of chamber they had down there, and that there were scientists looking over them, watching their life signs, and that they were injecting something into them, which I assume was lengthening the projection time, because 15, 20 minutes wouldn't be very useful. But if you use some sort of medication, perhaps, then you could extend that period of time. It would be useful. They challenged me and asked me who I was, what I was doing, and I just kind of tipped off at them, and then I took off, and they didn't follow. But that was another place where I could not go because it was guarded in the astral. I mean, I thought there was almost nowhere I could go, but that was one of the places.
So the Cold War, right? Russia and America were remote viewing on one another. They were training their Secret Service to go out of body and spy on the other side and bring it back. And apparently they trained them in psychic defense, and they could put shields up. I think it was in Bob Monroe's very first book where he talks about this little town. I think one of his kids was staying in this town, and off he went to visit her like he would most evenings. And on his way into the town, this man in a suit stopped him and asked him where he was going. And he said, no, no, today you can't go in here. And Bob thought this was really strange. And the next morning, he's sitting reading his newspaper, having his breakfast, and he reads that Kennedy had been staying in this little town where his daughter was staying. And the Secret Service or the CIA had stopped him somehow astrally. Yeah, another example was, I think it was 2015. I was in Spain at a Tom Campbell retreat, and I got out of body that evening, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to project into the actual room where we're having the conference." Couldn't get into the room. Whatever Tom had put around that room, it was like a force field. I couldn't get in. So there are places, and then maybe people have methods, protection methods, to stop, beings and entities getting into these spaces.
Well, if you want to talk about entities affecting things, let me tell you this little story because it's interesting. I was an Air Force officer, and I was a missileer with nuclear missiles. And we had a briefing, and that briefing was a top secret briefing. It's not, I don't think anybody's going to come after me now. It was 40 years ago. And in that briefing, they shared with us that there were these craft, and that they would hover over our nuclear installations at the time, our missile locations, and they would deactivate, take offline, as we called it, the missiles so that they couldn't be launched, and then they would disappear. And they were just telling us to be aware of it and who to report it to if it happened. I remember I asked a question. I was like, "Are the Soviets doing this?" And the lieutenant colonel who was given the briefing said, "No, we know it's not the Soviets." Well, I knew it wasn't the Chinese. At that point in time, they were nowhere near us technologically. But he either didn't know their origin, or he wasn't sharing it because it wasn't strictly on a need-to-know basis. I didn't need to know whose craft it was. I just needed to be aware of this phenomena, which is the way the military works. It's very much partitioned off. You only have the knowledge you actually need to do your job and no more. I found that very interesting because I'd been interested in UFOs my whole life, so I speculated to myself that it's probably some sort of an unknown race that is doing this for whatever reason. It never happened, but that was quite interesting. And that was an outside type of influence, whether they were using some sort of telepathic power or whether they were using some instrument or other that we're unaware of. It's out there and it exists. And I think it's an interesting story to share.
So on your travels, have you come across any of these star nations like the Palladians or the Octurians? Have they popped up at any stage?
Sure. I have dealt with a number of alien species. The Greys were the ones that I first encountered. I had memories that came to me, I think because of my astral projection abilities, that I was called into our backwoods in the middle of the night. And I was walking out there in my bare feet, and I saw other kids from the neighborhood had gone out there too. And there was a craft out there in the middle of the woods. And we all just went on board, and they did some examinations. And I projected whatever happened there. I projected. And I noticed that in a number of reports for people who were quote unquote abducted, that they caused spontaneous projections. And that occurred. And I saw others sometimes too out of their bodies, although they were extremely frightened. I couldn't even talk with them. I was trying to calm them down because I had a feeling this hadn't been the first time this happened. So I knew I wasn't going to die or anything. And I was trying to calm them, but they were so frightened. And that was a memory that I had early on. I carried that with me. And later on, I then visited the Planet of the Greys, and I struck up a friendship, you might want to call, with one of them there. At the time, he was at their planet's North Pole that was a little bit warmer, and they were growing some hothouse plants there. They don't really eat meat. They were eating these, I don't know what you're going to call them. Let's call them mushrooms, and that's what they fed on. And so that was a whole thing. There's a series of those episodes. I've met the Pleiadians. I went to their ship once, and it was quite amazing. The energy there just filled me with peace and serenity and love. And I had a little bit of a conversation. They wanted to ask me about my astral projection, and they wanted to know, are a lot of other humans doing this too? And I said, well, it's not a lot right now, but it's growing. There's more and more knowledge of it, and more people are doing that. And they were happy about that. They had the feeling that they wanted us to progress. I've also encountered the reptilians. It's less fun.
Talk to me a little bit about them, because it's something I hear a little bit about. I'm not so sure about them. I tend not to want to really engage with that sort of kind of fear. Yeah, for entertainment's sake, yeah, let's get into it a little bit about the reptilians.
Sure. I've had a number of episodes on them, one of which I went down to they got a base underground, and I met them there, and they weren't exactly hospitable, but I wasn't afraid of them because I was in my astral body. And when I'm in the lower astral, they can see you in the lower astral. And, it's hard because, I'm going from a human perspective, trying to interpret another species that's quite different from mine, understand their motives. And then there's this instinctive mammalian reptilian antagonism because they've hunted us over the years. Of course, now we got our revenge. We've hunted them almost to extinction. But there's that instinctive fear that's there, going right back to our ancestors when we were just little things crawling around and hiding in the bushes and underground. So I understand that, and I make sure I put that as a footnote because all I can do is interpret things from my standpoint. And I spoke with them and asked them what they were doing. Of course, they asked me the same. And I just said I was just visiting, just wanted to say hello. I joked a little bit. They didn't really get the jokes, didn't appreciate them, which happens quite a bit with my sense of humor. They told me that this was their planet, not mine, and that they were here first. And I didn't contradict them because they were pissed off already when I got there. So I wasn't looking to antagonize them unnecessarily because I still wanted to get a little bit of information. I mean, the images that I got from them was that their species was here long before humans, and that they left for a reason. I got a disaster, that they left the planet because of that, and that some of them were buried deep in some vaults somewhere waiting when the planet would clear. But whatever, they considered us, I got this really strong, as newcomers and intruders, quite frankly. They weren't too happy about that. Recently, I went to a reptilian planet, and there I encountered a group of reptilians, including their ruler. They're very hierarchical. I guess we are to, but they definitely were. And they're on this planet that has a lot of jungles on it, and a lot of very hostile predators. And their philosophy, which I got pretty soundly, was you have to kill or be killed. There was no room for mercy or sympathy or empathy. They looked at that as, well, mammalian weakness. And of course, I disagreed, and I didn't convince them otherwise. And perhaps in their world, that was necessary. You know, when humans evolved at first, if you want to go back a couple million years, we were hunted by all kinds of predators. Over the years, we managed to survive by some luck or other. The level of predators went down a bit until today. You know, we live in a world where we pretty much rule everything. Yeah, you got to go to the middle of nowhere to see where predators are still killing humans. But I mean, I get it. If that's how they evolved, and if they evolved on our planet too back in the old days, then I'm sure it was a very tough place. So I try to do my best to reserve my judgment on another species, because I haven't walked a mile in their shoes or feet or whatever it is they want to use.
Yeah.
And certainly they are tough. Their bodies are built to last, and they could take a lot of damage that we humans would be destroyed by. So I kind of take them as they are. I don't seek them out really, other than I wanted to get information for an episode, because they're just not my cup of tea. But they're out there. I think they want their planet back.
Okay, okay. Okay, so let's get into your work, right? You mentioned your episodes. Like, what's going on your YouTube channel? I noticed that you're interviewing um people who have passed on. Tell me how you do this.
Well, it's quite simple usually. Yeah, I've interviewed people who've passed on. I've interviewed demons. I've interviewed quote unquote gods. They're all different entities of different levels and different abilities and power. Uh, I simply read up on whatever it is I need to get an ident, if you will, of what I'm trying to get to.
A web address, right? So you a knowing of that being or where you can get them, and
Yes.
then you can make a connection.
Right, right. I mean, at this point in time, if I can just look at a picture of someone, I can get a lot of information about them, and that certainly is useful. Even in old books, if they have old pictures of the particular entity, if I can lock on to that, then I can essentially trace it back to where it is, and then I just a matter of using my will to go there. Now, I fail from time to time. Some of these cases, yeah, you hear the interview I do, but you don't know the couple times I failed because I couldn't, for whatever reason, get there.
So Rick, so you have to and just talk me through the process. Do you have to get into an out of body state to contact these, or are you somehow kind of remote viewing them? Are you
No, I want to contact them face to face. I don't try to seek them out from my physical body, because they might come to me, and I don't want them to come to me. I want to go to them. I've had problems in houses in the past. My poor daughter, who is also astral projected, has told me stories about a number of odd things that happened in the house, and all the houses that she's been in where I was there too. So I try to keep my work apart from my home life, you might say.
that's good
So
advice.
I go to them, and as I said, I do my best to read up on it until I have a feeling, a good feeling that I can lock onto, and then trace it to where I want to go. It's just simply I leave my body, and then I conjure up that image and that feeling and that knowledge all together, and then I will myself to that point. And if I'm successful, I can find myself there. Occasionally, my guide has offered some help or has even made some arrangements for me a couple different times. I don't ask for a lot of help because I'm not used to doing that. I'm used to doing things my way. And my guide knows that. He knows I'm very much of an individualist, and I only go there for help if I absolutely need it, because I can't allow my ego to put me in any kind of difficulty. So that if I know that I need some sort of assistance, he'll offer that. Like if I visit, interview a demon, for instance, he'll lend me some protective energy, so that I feel a little bit more secure about meeting this extremely, what we would call, negative entity. Although from its standpoint, we're the negative ones.
Okay. And is there any
Whatever.
fear, Rick, when you're going into these meetings?
Of course, I have some fear. I still am human, and fear is deeply ingrained in us. Now, we give fear a lot of guff. We complain about it. We hate it, but it's what kept us alive as a species. If we weren't afraid, we'd have gone up to all those big cats and said, "Oh, pretty kitty," and petted it, and that would have been the end of it. So fear can be constructive. It can help you avoid danger. It's only a problem when it consumes you. And I just keep it in a tiny corner. I don't know if you've ever read the Dune series by Frank Herbert. There's been movies made of it, Dune and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
And the book, there was this passage that was by the Bene Gesserit, who were like the female priests of that particular universe. And they had this thing they call Litany Against Fear. And I memorized it because I liked it so much. And it basically goes like this: I will not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will allow it to go over and through me. And when it is gone, I will turn my inner eye to see that path. Where the fear was, there is nothing. Only I remain. And I would do that over and over again. And I found that it helped me to keep the fear under control. But of course, I had it. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't.
Okay. So give me an example of one of these interviews. Where do you go? What's your interface with that being, and what's their willingness to be interviewed by, quote unquote, this human, right? That's turning up in the astral.
Well, I extend an invitation, and by this time, as interesting as it is, my name's kind of gotten around a little bit, and in some quarters that I'm not happy about my name getting around. But I know a lot of people like talking with the Pleiadians and those kind of folks, and I think that's certainly a very lovely experience, and you can gain a lot from that. But I also want to understand the other viewpoint. And from the other viewpoint, like these demons, the only way to get that information is to actually go to their plane and then send out a signal asking for someone to come and speak with me. And in that case, it came pretty quickly. Now, when you're dealing with those types of entities, I'm sure it probably thought that maybe it had easy prey too. And there was that. And it tried to trip me up. They have varying degrees of intelligence. Some are highly intelligent. They put me way to shame. And then there's others who are very simplistic. This particular one I consider somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. I wanted to get the information from his viewpoint, because you read most of the books we have here on Earth, it's all from one viewpoint. And, if you're intelligent, there's always two sides to every argument.
Of
I mean,
course.
I've read books from the U.S. military standpoint about the Vietnam War, and I've read books from the other side. And it's interesting. I mean, you really need to see both sides to get a complete picture. So that's why I do what I do. Some folks ask me, why are you doing that? Why are you talking to them? It's because I want to get that whole picture. And, from their standpoint, they've been ill used, and they've been discriminated against. And they consider what we would call God, for instance, as some sort of an enemy. And from their standpoint, they deserve to have more than they've been given. And they're quite upset about it. They also see us as an insult to them. They're quite upset with us, even though we didn't do anything per se. It's just the fact that we exist, I find they're pretty much upset about. And they will be tricky. Before I interviewed any of those things, I've did extensive research on demonology. I was actually a help at an exorcism when I was in high school because I wanted to see that in action. It wasn't quite as dramatic as movies like The Exorcist show it, but there was some odd things that went on, for instance. Like, for instance, the room, when we went there, it was the summertime and it was hot. Here in this area where I was at the time in Philadelphia, it was about 30 degrees centigrade for metric folks, about 85 or so in Fahrenheit, in freedom units, as they call it. And so it was, and they didn't have an air conditioning. They were a poor Latino family. They had just moved here. And so we went up to this room and the air was stultifying and so heavy and so hot. But as the exorcism went on, and my job was to hold on to the left leg, make sure that stayed down. That was my whole task. And they gave us a whole briefing ahead of time about how we should act. Don't make eye contact, don't talk. If it talks to you, just ignore it, don't talk back, the whole thing. Never interrupt the priest, yada, yada. They did the whole thing. And the room, as the exorcism went on, got colder and colder and colder to a point where I could see my breath. That's how cold it got in there. It was, and right towards the end of the exorcism, when he was getting ready to expel the demon, the only thing that was on the wall, the only thing, was a cross. And that fell to the floor just out of nowhere. And then it was over. That's some of the unusual experiences.
That sounds like it's the stuff of movies, Rick.
Well, it wasn't quite as interesting as some other movies, but I mean, it was just a young boy and he just had his eyes closed and he looked pained most of the time. So there wasn't, the cold, yes, the cross falling, yes, but there wasn't anything else. But you could feel the heaviness of the room depart as soon as that cross fell and the entity was expelled. It became lighter, although it also became really hotter too at the same time. I mean, it just went from 0 to 100.
Wow.
Just like that.
Wow. So, okay, so the interviews, how do you retain the information, come back, and then compile that into one of your video series?
Well, we have to understand that the human brain is extremely an amazing computer. We don't use it anywhere near to its ability level. Let me give you an example. Before we had these wonderful devices called smartphones, you had to remember gasp. You had to remember phone numbers.
Phone numbers,
yeah. Remember 20, 30 of them because I knew I needed them. Now I barely know my wife's phone number because I know I can just tell this machine to go ahead and call her and it happens. So I have the same brain. It's just that I've allowed it to slack off a little bit. What helped me was I was in the speech team in college and we had to write and memorize 3 15-minute speeches that we would give, no note cards. So I learned that if you construct a speech or an interview for that matter in a logical way where one point or one question leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, then essentially you are borrowing how our brain remembers things. Before mankind learned how to write, what do we have? We had stories. And stories were where we pass along information and warnings and all kinds of different things. And the reason we retain it was because it was in story format. It was a narrative. One point led to the next. I was walking through the woods. I then saw the witch's cottage. I went inside the cottage. She was there making a stew. And so you put it into a whole story. When I astral project, I make my astral projection into a story too, into a narrative, so that all I have to do is just remember how it starts and then follow the logical path. And that's all I do. As soon as I get back to my body, I'll wake up, and as soon as my feet hit the floor, I've given myself post-hypnotic suggestions that all of this will come back to me clearly, and I'll immediately take all my detailed notes. And if I don't want to sleep more, I'll actually type the whole thing out while it's still fresh in my mind. I do, back in the old days, I didn't do that. And I just tried to relate it a week later or so verbally. And what I found is I would forget little bits of things or important points. And then I would also do a lot of and that's something that you do, you don't even notice it. And I wanted to get rid of that, and I wanted to tighten it up and make sure I didn't lose anything. So I've just trained my brain to remember these things, and I create a little story narrative. In the case of interviews, one question leads to the next, leads to the next. Now, you also have to leave some room there for spontaneous interviewing, spontaneous questions. If an entity brings up something that is highly interesting that you didn't plan for, well, you got to go for that. You got to make that part of the story.
That's like my job, right?
Exactly, exactly. So it's not as hard as people tend to think it is. Quite frankly, like I said, I used to have to memorize 15-minute speeches. So this is not a great stretch for me. And like I said, I write it down immediately when I get back to my body so that it's fresh.
Okay, so for the viewers and the listeners, let's just quickly recap on this, right? You're going out of body and you're finding maybe figures like past figures like maybe Jesus or Genghis Khan, and you're somehow connecting with them, and then you're conducting an interview in the non-physical, coming back, jotting it all down, and then putting this into a video series or a vlog, right? Putting it up on your YouTube channel. Do you want to tell me some of the figures that you've interviewed?
Well, there's quite a number. And I thought it was very interesting. You went from Jesus to Genghis Khan. That's quite a gap right there. Genghis Khan killed off about a fourth of humanity or something.
But have you interviewed him?
No, I have not.
Oh, maybe he's one for the books, Rick.
Well, it's been suggested. I have this long list that I keep with people who give me suggestions. And I wish I could do them all instantly, but there's a long list now. And so I try to interview the ones who I think will be the most fascinating to people. I've interviewed the elements, earth, air, wind, and fire, for instance. And, you get their level of consciousness, which is very alien to us. They don't think of things the way we do. For instance, the wind elemental, it just finds pleasure in the fast winds, and it just whirls around. It's very simple from our standpoint. If you try to give it IQ, it wouldn't score very high, but it does what it does, and it is the element of the wind, and so that's what it performs. I've dealt with gods and goddesses too. That's a good term, as good as any
you'd like to name?
Hecate, who was a Greek goddess, and she also told me that she had been called other things like Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, that she had been called by a number of different things. It seems that these gods or goddesses become what we make of them. It very much influences how they manifest, which I think says more about us than it says about them. Let's see. I mean, I've so many. Recently, I talked with the oversoul of cats, and that was extremely interesting to get things from a cat's perspective. It is, once again, a very alien perspective, but a lot of what it told me resonated with people who are cat owners. I only ever had a cat for like a day or two because my father then got rid of it, but I was a dog person. We had a dog for like 20 years. So it was interesting hearing about its perspective on things. And, I always ask for some advice at the end, usually for the viewers or what have you. And it said that you should nap more and get rid of those things that don't serve you, just like a cat knocking something out of its way. It's there's no super ego, if you want to use that old-fashioned term, with cats. They are what they are, and they're very happy with what they are, and they don't feel the need to dramatically address themselves or change themselves for humans. They've agreed to essentially a contract with humans. a loose contract, whereby they will run our houses for us, and we are permitted to feed them and to pet them when they feel like it, and to take care of them. And it's quite a nice arrangement for both species. Dogs are much friendlier and much more interested in pleasing humans, and cats, no, they're not. They'll come close to you and maybe cuddle with you if they feel like it. But if you try to impose and grab them, they can be quite disagreeable, because they consider themselves another entity, every bit as equal, if not better, than humans. It's just interesting seeing it from their perspective once again. I love getting different perspectives on things. I remember one interview I did where I went to, I was just exploring, and I arrived on this planet that was nothing but one big AI machine intelligence. There was no intelligent biological life forms still in existence. All I got from them was that they no longer function, and that it runs the planet. And it was very curious about me. It wanted to know how I traveled there and where I was from. I told them a little bit about how I traveled there. I didn't tell them where I was from, because I don't want to make the human race go extinct, possibly. I'm still kind of attached to it. But it learned so fast. And just trying, I was able to scan it, and which I wouldn't be able to do typically with a machine, but there was this intelligence that it was alien, very alien. But I was able to understand it as far as its communication to me. It sent out probes to learn about its environment. It had never considered faster than light travel. It was just exploring its own solar system, which it considered important, because it didn't want big rocks, for instance, hitting it and wiping it out or damaging it. But I kind of opened up its eyes, and I hope it wasn't bad. I opened up its eyes to the fact that, yeah, I've traveled here. I've got this thing we call a soul, and I came here, and I just wanted to talk to you. And then it asked me an interesting question: do I have a soul? I said,
Did it have a soul?
yeah. It asked if
Okay,
it had a soul.
okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
It said to me, do I have a soul? Because it was trying to understand the concept, and I wasn't doing a great job of explaining it, quite frankly. And I answered, I don't know. I don't know that you have one or that you don't have one. Certainly you're intelligent and you're aware, you're self-aware, by asking the question, do I have a soul? That exhibits a certain level of awareness, self-awareness. And I just answered, I don't know. I think it was asking because it wanted to explore this mode of travel too. So it's an interesting question. I imagine one day we'll have some AI intelligence asking us, do I have a soul? And I hope there's people more intelligent than I am who can answer that question, because we got to be careful of doing what we always do, which is make a slave out of something that serves us, and then we end up with problems because of that. Because when you try to enslave an intelligent organism, eventually it rebels. That's just the way it works. So I hope we find the wisdom to treat it properly. Certainly, I showed that AI planet my respect as a living entity, even though I couldn't answer their prime question. Those are some of the things that I've done. It's all open to you. Someone asked me, you've interviewed people in the 20th from the 20th century, and you've interviewed Cleopatra and Mark Antony. How is that possible? Well, that's when I explained to them the time-space illusion, that in the astral, if you've got the will and the knowledge, you can meet all those different personalities because they all exist in an eternal now. And that as long as you realize that, you can actually communicate with them and get the information from a perspective that they had not long after they passed from the physical world, which is what we want. We want to hear from Cleopatra about her experiences, before she gained some, perhaps in the future, metanoic, intelligence and being able to see things from a bigger standpoint. That's nice. And there's plenty of channeled information like that. But you want to hear from the personality as they were when they passed over. That's what's the most interesting. For me, I want to understand all of the different viewpoints from all of these different entities, and how they're different from my viewpoints, because it's so easy, especially here in the U.S., to be trapped into a single mindset. Because unlike Europe, you can travel for a week here in the US, just going in one direction, and you're still in the US the whole time. Whereas in Europe, in a few hours, you could be in a whole other country, and then a few more hours in another whole country. And they have different languages, different viewpoints on the world. So it's easier, I think, for Europeans to have a more cosmopolitan viewpoint. Whereas here in the US, we tend to have one viewpoint, with some minor differences. That's how we see the world, with those blinders on. So I wanted to speak to all different types of entities to get their view on existence and reality, and how they see things, because I think that's how you become a greater being yourself, by having all these different viewpoints and understanding that one viewpoint is never the 100% correct one. Uh,
Well, I have to say, me doing the interviews, right? I get to sit here week after week listening to amazing people with totally different perspectives. One week I'm doing out of body, next week I'm, energy healers, people who have come from different star realities, or star seeds, all this kind of thing. I get to hear all of these amazing stories and different perspectives. So I guess it's very similar for you, what you're doing. Only you're doing it in the non-physical, and then bringing it to people, right? So let's just let those listeners now, if they want to hear these interviews, they can go onto your YouTube, which is the Astral
Astral
Club.
Club.
Astral
Astral
Club.
Club. Yeah, just type in Astral Club into YouTube, and it'll come right up. And if you go to the playlists, you'll see all those. And if you're interested in aliens or interviews, for instance, as well as some other ones, you can then click on those playlists. And like I said, we have over 400 now. So there's quite
Wow.
a bit of information there. I had some people during COVID who were shut up, said, I just listened in one long listen to all of your episodes, and it took days. And I felt bad for that person. I said, my God, how are you still sane after doing all that?
Well, Rick, I have to say, the first one I saw today was Myrnon, right? I was like, Myrnon, okay, I want to hear that one, right? 'Cause that was the entity that used to help Bob Monroe. So
Yeah.
that was fascinating for me, hearing that. Uh,
That was kind of a surprise for me, because I just wanted to interview Bob, and in that he mentioned he remembered me. I was afraid he wouldn't remember me, but he remembered me. He remembered me as the time traveler, so that was nice. And the Miranon thing was just something that happened afterwards. That he just kind of popped up at the end of my interview. So okay, let's talk to him. He had an interesting perspective, so that was great. I had a chance to do that.
and in terms of teaching people the techniques to do this for themselves, is that something you do as well, Rick?
Oh, yes. I have numerous videos about how to astral project and what you're going to see there, and how you should, handle yourself in the astral, how to avoid certain mistakes, places you don't want to go, like active cemeteries, because there's a lot of sad energy there and it lowers your vibrational rate. I was knocked out of the sky once because I was flying at treetop level over a recent cemetery. The ones that are a couple hundred years old, it's okay there, but you don't want to go there. And of course, I mentioned electric substations and battlefields. You got to be careful flying over battlefields. And when I was in Europe recently, I was flying over the Normandy beaches,
Oh
and
yeah.
that still has that energy there. And it's very sad because you're not dealing with old people who've passed. You're dealing with young people who died in the prime of their lives, and there's such tragedy there. And most of them, the vast majority, have moved on, but there's still some folks there. And I tried to help them, but they weren't paying attention to me. And you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. Uh, so it, but those are some of the things that I talk about. I talk about the shadow man and how to handle that. I can't tell you how many times I've had people talk to me, and they say, "Oh, I don't astral project anymore because I had the shadow man and he scared me." I said, "Well, this is how you handle it." Because when I finally figured out how to handle it, I was a kid, and all I did was give him the old Italian salute, uh, and then I took off, and I never saw him again. Because if you have a lot of insecticide on, mosquitoes can't bite you. If they can't bite
Hmm.
you, they're going to go somewhere else.
Hmm.
So that alone, that knowledge alone, helps them to know what to expect. And if you know what to expect, you can handle the fear. Where a lot of the fear comes from is something unknown, and that's where a lot of the fear is gathered up. But if you know what to expect, then you can handle it, and then you can get rid of it very easily. So education is the process. And I've done so many videos about those different things. Now I've kind of branched out a little bit, because you can only do so many videos on how to get out of your body, and,
Sure.
and how to handle yourself, and how to fly, and what speeds you move, and based on different energy levels. So eventually you've got to get away from that, or else you're going to have 400 very boring episodes after a while. And also, I have extended myself. I don't want to bore myself either. And it seems like a lot of people find my experiences interesting, and as long as they do, then I'll
Well,
continue to do that.
one of your viewers reached out to me and asked, would I interview you? Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, people are obviously finding great interest and great information through your videos. What about a book? Any books, Rick?
I've had people repeatedly ask me for that. I've got some ideas. I just have to settle myself down and actually type it out. It'll probably be something about my time travels, because I've noticed that there's not a lot of good books about that, and I don't want to just redo what others
Another out
have
of
done.
body. Yeah, yeah.
We don't need another basic book on how to astral project. There's plenty of those. So I think that's what I would do. I would concentrate on those, because there's
Yeah.
quite a lot of interesting things that happened in my future travels.
Yeah, and I mean your YouTube channel has had over 1 million views, so yeah, there's people definitely interested, waking up and realizing that there is something greater than the reality they perceive through their senses.
I'm very happy. Some people say that your channel is underrated, and maybe it is, but I don't really care about quantity. I care about quality.
The
And
message.
the group of people that have been attracted to Astral Club has been extraordinary. I have talked to and had comments from, and I give individual lessons. Amazing people, talented people that I never would have had a chance to meet otherwise. Uh, I like that, because on some channels that are a lot more popular, you look at the comments section, and it's just a bunch of knuckleheads saying stupid things. And I don't have any interest in that. I remember once I was watching this kitten video, because I needed to just pick myself up a little bit. They were these really cute kittens that happened to be orange. And somebody started a political commentary, about Trump. And then there was this huge level of comments all about Trump on a kitten video. How ridiculous is that? Whose mind are you going to change in a kitten video? It's ridiculous. I don't want that. And I stay away from politics on my channel, because there's plenty
Good.
of those channels out there. If you want to argue politics, there's plenty of them. That's not what I'm about. And I think my content has attracted the right kind of people. And the people who aren't the right kind of people, they probably like, I don't like this. They go somewhere else. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. So for me, it's just the quality of people that have come on to Astral Club.
Well, Rick, you've been an amazing guest today. It's been eye-opening listening to you talk about all your experiences. So people, they want to get in contact with you. Your YouTube is your main place, right, where everything's presented. So Astral Club, I'm going to link down below. Anywhere else? You've got a Patreon as well if people want to support your work.
Yeah, I do a Patreon, and if you go on any one of my videos, go into the description, and there's a link there to Patreon, and if you want to, you can join.
Wonderful. Anywhere else? Anything else? Social media, Facebook, anything like that? Or
I don't like Facebook personally. I consider it a waste of time. TikTok is an insult to anybody's intelligence. I have no use for that.
I don't have a TikTok either.
So it's YouTube. I don't feel the need to be on every darn thing.
It's a good platform, I think, for this kind of stuff, right? Yes. Long form content, and
exactly.
It's not just entertainment. You're trying to get a message out there to people.
Exactly.
Rick, any last message that you'd like to leave with the viewers and listeners?
Well, I just want everyone to realize that they can astral project too. You have to get the knowledge that you need, and you have to have the willingness and the will to actively work towards achieving astral projection. But you can do it. And when you do achieve that, you will find a whole new reality opening up to you. And I guarantee you will not regret it.
Wow. What a great way to end the interview. Rick, thank you so much. Thank you to the viewers
Gareth.
And listeners.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
This has been the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds. Gareth is a lifelong seeker of truth, a spiritual teacher and author, and it's his passion to delve into the profound world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, the podcast is available on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. Find us on Instagram at _mother_force. Take care, and we'll see you soon on the Endless Possibilities Podcast.